Hello and welcome. We often talk about defending our organizations against fraud with things like controls and audits. But today, we're going to go deeper. We're going to explore your organization's ethical culture, not as a nice to have, but as your single most important strategic asset in that defense. This quote right here says it all. It comes from the fallout of the Enron scandal, and it just perfectly captures what happens when a culture fails. You can have all the rules in the world, all the lawyers, all the accountants, but if the culture doesn't empower people to speak up and say no, then those rules are pretty much meaningless. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at why ethics is a genuine strategic asset. Then we'll get really clear on what an ethical culture actually is. We'll cover the undeniable link to fraud, and then the practical bit, how you can assess your own culture. We'll bring it home with a look at the Namibian context, and finally wrap up with how we can build a stronger future. Right, so let's reframe how we think about this. A strong ethical culture isn't about compliance. It's not a cost center or a box-ticking exercise. It's actually your organization's most proactive defense mechanism. It's about creating an environment where doing the right thing is just the default way of doing things. Harvard research has this fascinating concept called ethical fading. And what it means is when we're under intense pressure, to hit targets, to meet deadlines, the actual ethical side of a decision can just fade away. It disappears from view. This is how good people end up making really poor choices. It's not that they're bad people, it's that the system they're in has pushed the ethics right out of the picture. A strong culture stops that from happening. It keeps that moral dimension front and center. So, what does an ethical culture really look like on a day-to-day basis? What does it feel like to work in one? Let's move away from the abstract ideas and get into some concrete, observable terms. At its heart, an ethical culture really answers one simple question. How do things get done around here, especially when nobody's watching? It's that shared set of unwritten rules, values, and norms that guides people when they're facing a tricky situation or a tough ethical dilemma. And it's built on a few key pillars. It all starts with the leadership's tone from the top. That's non-negotiable. Then you need a foundation of fairness and trust. People have to feel psychologically safe enough to raise a hand and say, hang on a minute, without fear of reprisal. There have to be clear consequences for bad behavior. And of course, your incentives and your values have to be aligned. You can't say you value integrity, but then only reward the person who hits their sales target no matter what. It all has to work together. Okay, this is absolutely crucial. This isn't just about creating a nice place to work. Having a strong ethical culture has a direct, measurable impact on how vulnerable your organization is to fraud. Let's look at the hard evidence. The data on this is crystal clear. On one side, a strong culture is like a shield. It actively deters misconduct, it encourages people to report things early, and that reduces fraud losses. But a weak culture, well, it's not neutral. It's an active threat. It enables misconduct. It creates a culture of silence where people are afraid to speak up, and that's where fraud can really grow and fester. And this isn't some far-off global issue. Right here in Namibia, our own Financial Intelligence Center has drawn a direct line between the rise in suspicious transactions and, you guessed it, weaknesses in organizational controls and major cultural gaps. This brings the risk right to our doorstep. It's real, and it has serious financial and legal consequences locally. So that leads us to the big question, doesn't it? How do you actually know what your culture's like? How do you assess where your organization stands right now? Let's walk through a practical way to do just that. Think of this as a continuous cycle, not a one-off project. It has to start with genuine commitment from leadership. Without that, you're going nowhere. From there, you gather the real data through anonymous surveys, confidential interviews, and just observing how things work. You review your systems, like promotions and bonuses, to see what behavior they're really driving. That helps you spot the behavioral red flags, which then feeds into a very targeted action plan. And that plan, it needs leadership to champion it, which starts the whole cycle of improvement all over again. Here's a really powerful tool you can embed in your culture. It's this idea of a magic pause button. It's about teaching people to create that little bit of space between something happening, a stimulus, and their reaction to it. When someone is feeling pressured to do something they're not sure about, training them to just pause, take a breath, that's when they can reconnect with their values and make a courageous choice, not just a reactive one. Now, let's bring this right back home and focus specifically on the Namibian context. Reports from our own institutions like the ACC and the Auditor General give us a very clear picture of the common cultural weaknesses we really need to be watching out for.
If you look at the findings from the FIC, the Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Auditor General, you start to see the same themes over and over. We see breakdowns in basic controls, leaders ignoring obvious red flags, and a widespread attitude of non-compliance. But the really big one is a lack of consequence management, where people do the wrong thing and nothing happens. That creates a reluctance to report wrongdoing, what's often called the bystander effect. All of these are direct symptoms of a weak ethical culture.
So once you've assessed your culture and you understand the risks, the final piece of the puzzle is to actively build a stronger future. And believe me, taking a proactive approach here brings huge benefits that go way beyond just avoiding trouble. The return you get on investing in your culture is just immense. Yes, you get significant fraud prevention, but you also create a place where great people want to work, which boosts morale and retention. You build a brand reputation that's based on real trust. You see better, clearer decision-making across the board. And all of that together is what creates real, long-term business sustainability. At the end of the day, building and looking after an ethical culture is a journey. It's not a destination. It takes real courage and commitment from the top, and a clear, practical methodology. To learn more, I encourage you to join the full webinar on ethical culture assessment for organizations.